Hello and welcome to Lost Love Chronicles. Dear listeners, today we're thrilled to give a special shout out to the incredibly talented Ronald Birds. He has generously shared an amazing story with us, and we can't wait for you to experience the magic of his words. If you enjoyed Ronald's story, be sure to explore more of his literature on Amazon. We've added links to his work in the description box below, so you can easily dive into his captivating storytelling. Sending loads of love to Ronald Burns for his contribution, and to all our listeners, thank you for being part of this literary journey with us. And if you want to share your work with us, please send your work at the email mentioned in the description box, and we will publish it for our listeners at Lost Love Chronicles. Now let's get on with the story. Dolores was the most beautiful girl in our English class, and one of the most beautiful in our college. I didn't listen to the professor. All my attention was focused on Dolores. The time and place of our marriage was firmly set in my mind. We get married at Curtis Arboretum in Cheltenham the week after we graduated college and live in Chestnut Hill. I also knew the names of our first two children. All that was left was for me to do was to get up the courage to talk to her and ask her on a date. It was the first week of our freshman year in college in Philadelphia. I followed Dolores to the cafeteria after class. She sat alone. I watched as 3 different guys, all handsome and athletic, sat down and tried to talk her up. After a few minutes, each guy shook his head and left her alone. She seemed to be on the edge of tears. I wasn't handsome or athletic, but I was told that I was funny. I usually heard this as my pretty date told me not to call her again. If I was older, more experienced, or smarter, I would have taken the hint and lowered my sights in women. I sat down at Dolores' table next to her. I can see that she was trying desperately to hold back tears. I think we should name our first 2 children Josh and Adam, but I'm open to compromise if you don't like those names. That caught her off guard and looked quizzical. Who are you? She didn't ask, she demanded. Was I unclear? Obviously, I'm your future husband. She smiled and then laughed. It was the first time I'd seen her smile and I liked it. I looked deeply into her beautiful brown eyes. And why am I going to marry you? She asked. Because I can make you smile and I understand you. I see a lot of pain and suffering in your beautiful eyes. Let's go over there and talk for a moment in privacy. I pointed to a deserted section of the cafeteria. I took her hand despite her protest, and she followed me. We stood behind a pillar invisible to everyone else. I want to make you smile and laugh, but I can't do it until you let out all the pain. Please, feel safe to cry as much as you need to. Let it all out. I put my hands on hers, and the floodgates opened. She cried softly at first, and then louder. Let it all out. I whispered again as I let go of her hand and hugged her. She hugged me as tightly as a life preserver on the Titanic. My father died 2 weeks ago. I said the obvious, and you miss him. Yes, but I hardly knew him. She whispered, and then the tears flowed again. I've lived in Philadelphia for the last 5 years while he stayed in Venezuela. I loved him. I missed him, but just before he got sick, I told him I hated him for deserting us, not joining his family in Philadelphia, and I feel so guilty about that. She cried some more, and I summoned up all the courage in my short, skinny, barely cute body and kissed her on her lips. To my shock, amazement, and joy, she kissed me back. We'll name our first son Josh, after my father, and then later we'll figure out names for the rest of our brood. By the way, what is your name? For the first time in my life, I was speechless for a moment. I'm Steve. Does this mean we're engaged? She nodded yes, and tears of joy replaced her tears of sorrow. She hesitated for a moment. We aren't really engaged, we're just dating, maybe going steady. We'll see what happens. We graduated with degrees in accounting. We may not have been exciting, but we were happy, I thought. For over 20 years we worked together, lived together, and raised our children together. We finished each other's sentences and fed each other spoonfuls of dessert together. We each serviced different accounts. We had a boutique practice specializing in dry cleaners. We started with one who was so impressed that he recommended us to friends of his in the same business. Can you think of anything more boring? I can't, but it provided a nice lifestyle for us. We didn't want to be reliant on 1 or 2 large clients who could leave at once and bankrupt us. Instead, we had about 20 small clients. The loss of any one wouldn't hurt us. In all our years together, we'd only had one serious argument. No, it wasn't an argument. It was a knockdown, drag-out, go for the jugular fight. My wife was approached by a Mr. Brown, a potential client who ran a shady business and wanted my wife to cook his books to cheat the IRS. In return, he would pay her a fortune. She was on board with this idea. I raised hell. I refused to take on that client. She claimed we wouldn't go to jail if he was caught, but I didn't care. First of all, the client would have sold us down the river in an instant and claimed that we were guilty and he was innocent. But I didn't even get to that point in the argument. We had a reputation as trustworthy, honest people, and there was no way in how I would jeopardize that. Philadelphia is ultimately a small town, and I could give you a list of crooked accountants who got caught and never worked again. I refused to risk being on that list. My wife refused to give in and stopped speaking to me for several days. I always try to be proactive. I phoned the potential client and explained that if he hired my wife, I would be the one to contact the Internal Revenue Service about him. That put a stop to this insanity. We waited years to have children until we could afford to buy a home with some money left over in the bank. We moved to a big house, Cherry Hill, New Jersey, with a yard too big for me to maintain. Now we had 3 children in elementary school and 1 in high school. I was the proudest father on earth. I cooked for them, drove them to school, and took them to playgrounds or movies with their friends. I even did their laundry. I was the more kid-centered parent, while Dolores was more work-centered. Because it was tax season, we both had to work late a lot, but Dolores was now working late every night. I checked her online schedule and saw that she wasn't meeting clients at these late-night meetings. The next night, I borrowed my father's car and parked near her last scheduled meeting of the day. I followed her to a really expensive house on Philadelphia Society Hill. I took photos as she exited her car and was met with a kiss by a silver-haired man, but I couldn't make out his face. I thought of sneaking up to the house and trying to photograph them as they were intimate, but the bedrooms were on the 2nd floor and I wasn't Spider-Man. I also didn't want to get arrested for prowling, so I drove home. My wife returned home with damp hair. Obviously, she had showed at her lover's house. I didn't confront her. I had to come up with a plan. I wanted to divorce her immediately, but there were serious financial considerations that I had to take into account. Remember, I'm an accountant. I withdrew all the money from my 401k and put it in trust for our children's college education. I changed my beneficiary on my life insurance and will. Twice more, I followed my wife to her lover's house. Our love life, which was never over the moon, seriously dwindled. My biggest worry was the lifetime alimony I would have to pay my wife even if she lived with her boyfriend, because that was the law in New Jersey. That's what I had to play in. I convinced my wife that we should sell our New Jersey house and move back to Philadelphia. We'd be closer to our accounts. The kids could walk places. In our present house in the suburbs, they had to be driven everywhere, and we often didn't have the time. It was a source of constant arguments with them. As an added, unspoken bonus, my wife would be closer to her lover. Actually, she could walk there. She instantly agreed to move back to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The kids didn't want to leave their friends, but it wasn't their decision. We sold our house in New Jersey and bought a larger, more expensive house in Center City, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The schools were great, and the kids could walk to the nearby stores and movies. As an added bonus for my wife, she spent a lot more time with her boyfriend. We had next to no equity in the new house to lose in a divorce. A few months later, I sat and waited for the other shoe to drop as we both worked night and day prior to April 15th. On April 20th or so, just after we had exhausted ourselves for the last 2 months getting all of our clients' tax returns prepared, we usually sat down to discuss where to go on a long weekend vacation to recuperate. I wanted to ski in Vermont, while my wife wanted to lounge at an indoor pool in Atlantic City. I rarely argued with my wife over little things. Okay, we'll go to Atlantic City, I said, knowing full well what would happen next. Steve, we have to talk. Dolores looked very serious, and I was feeling apprehensive. This didn't sound good, and I was afraid I knew where it was going. You'll stay home with the kids while I go to Atlantic City alone. Dolores stopped talking and looked closely for my reaction. To do what alone? I asked, terrified of hearing her answer. I need some time by myself. I went straight from my mother's apartment to marrying you. I've never lived alone, not even for a week. I wasn't gentle or understanding. I knew the moment of confrontation had arrived. Who is he? And don't lie to me. We went back and forth as she denied there was anyone else until I finally wore her down. I've met someone else, and I want to spend a week with him while I decide what to do with my life. You want to take him on a test drive while you decide if you want to divorce me, I said. Dolores didn't answer. Well, sweetheart, I said with all the sarcasm I could muster. Let me decide for you. Since you have a lover, I'm filing for divorce. Dolores' eyes bubbed out. No, I don't want a divorce. I just want to take a vacation from everything. You, the kids, and work for a week or two. And I haven't slept with him yet. You're lying. I can see it on your face. You can't look me in the eye. I'll only say this once. Don't do this, and maybe we can patch up our marriage despite your infidelity. It's too late. I've made arrangements, I promised him. I'm packed, and he's picking me up in an hour. What about your promise to forsake all others? She didn't answer. I stopped talking and went upstairs to pack some clothes. I kissed each of my kids, and I came downstairs. In 5 minutes, I walked out the door to my car, with Dolores right behind me. Where are you going? We agreed that you would stay and watch the children. She said. You agreed, not me. They're your problem now, not mine. I put my bags in the truck. You can't just drive away. Who will watch the children? Take them with you. Let them see who their mother really is. Let's see how your boyfriend likes taking care of your children. I started the car as Dolores asked, when are you coming back? Her tears smudged her eyeshadow. I drove away without answering. I drove to the end of our block, turned right, and waited to see who would drive over to my house. I watched the silver-haired man, driving a silver Porsche, stop in front of my house. Dolores came out, and though I couldn't hear them, it was obvious that they were arguing. Then my youngest child came out, followed by two more. The man looked at them all and shook his head. My wife tried to kiss him, but he withdrew from her, got back in his car and burnt rubber getting away. I didn't recognize him, and I guessed he didn't know what I or my car looked like, so I followed him. He drove a few miles away and parked in front of a restaurant. His license plate was his last name, Brown 35. That's pretty stupid if you want to fuck with people and try to remain anonymous, but I already knew his name. I knew everything about him except what he looked like. He was 52, divorced twice, behind on his child support payments and had a pacemaker. He walked inside and I was right behind him as we both got in line to be seated. I started my iPhone's recording app as I whispered in his ear, "Excuse me, Mr. Brown." He seemed startled. "You know my name. Do I know you? I'm Dolores' husband." "Whose husband?" he said. "Don't play dumb." He was at least 3 inches taller and much more muscular than I was, and he puffed out his chest and laughed at me. He jabbed my chest hard with his pointer finger. "Don't try to act like a tough guy. You're an accountant for dry cleaners." He laughed at me. "How long have you been sleeping with Dolores?" I asked. "I've been intimate with your wife for 2 years, for eyes." He glared at me. "What are you going to do about it?" "For eyes?" That's the best he can come up with. "Are you still in junior high school?" His face turned red. He was embarrassed. "You have a heart pacemaker, so I won't lay a hand on you. If I did punch you in the heart hard enough, you probably have a heart attack and I'd be charged with assault and battery. Though I could live with that, you wouldn't survive it." That seemed to take the wind out of his sails. "And besides, you're right, I'm not a tough guy, but some of my accounting clients in South Philadelphia are. They own dry cleaners so they can launder money. They lend money at very, very high interest rates and hurt people who make late payments. You might call them loan sharks. They rely on me to keep them out of prison. If you ever speak to or come near my wife again or even answer her phone call, I'll ask them for a favor and they'll break both of your legs. If I were you, I'd block her phone number. Am I clear?" I watched the color drain from his face and then I walked away. I shut off my cell phone, drove to the local mountains, rented ski equipment, and had a great time. It really helped me unwind. I phoned my lawyer and started the divorce. I stayed for almost a week, never spoke with my wife, and then I drove home after first stopping to pick up the divorce papers. My wife had aged 5 years since the previous week. The house was a mess. My youngest son ran over to me crying, wearing dirty, smelly, unwashed clothes. I tried to pick him up, but he was too heavy, so we sat down together on the couch after I pushed a week's worth of newspapers off of it onto the floor. I hugged him for a few minutes and then sent him to his room. I turned to my wife. "So how was your time with your lover, Mr. Brown? How do you know his name? I'm not as clueless as you obviously think I am. Aren't you afraid of giving him a heart attack? He has a heart pacemaker." The pacemaker revelation shocked her. I couldn't go. I had the kids. How did he take it? I couldn't hide my smirk. He was very understanding. I could tell she was lying. I grabbed her cell phone from the coffee table and scrolled through until I found Darren Brown. I put it on speaker, dialed the number, and learned that he took my advice and blocked my wife's phone. I found 5 texts from my wife to Mr. Brown, begging him to contact her, but they weren't delivered. "It looks like your test drive didn't go very well," I said. She broke down crying. "I'm so sorry. I didn't love him. It was only sex. You're the only one I love. It meant nothing to me. And that's why you slept with him." She silently sat down and then cried. "How can I make it up to you? By not fighting me on the divorce." My wife went from groveling to aggressive 0 to 60 in 2.5 seconds, much like her boyfriend's Porsche. "If we can't work this out, I'll take you to the cleaners, pun intended. I'll take your 401k and keep you broke and living in your car while you pay me alimony for the rest of your life." I laughed in her face. There are a lot of reasons not to like Pennsylvania. The winters are too cold, and the summers are too hot, and the traffic is horrendous. Pennsylvania does have one saving grace. Since I have proof that you committed adultery, I don't have to pay you any alimony at all, not 1 cent. It's a good thing we no longer live in New Jersey. She gasped for breath and I thought she would have a heart attack. "Why don't you move out of this house and move in with your lover?" "Oh, I forgot, after you threw away your family, your boyfriend threw you away. That's too bad. He had such a nice Porsche, and frankly his house is a mansion. It's a lot nicer than this home, but now you can't live in either one." The divorce was acrimonious and took a while. At the end I received the house until the kids were 18, at which time we would sell it and split the proceeds. I also received full custody of the children, because I had been their primary caregiver for years and my wife had to pay me child support and a little bit of alimony. I didn't care about the amount. I just wanted to mess with her mind each month when she made out a check to me. In the 2 years since our divorce was final, my wife sees the children whenever she wants, usually twice a month for a few hours. I haven't met a beautiful woman in her late 20s. I have lost 10 pounds, mostly due to my terrible cooking. Center City is filled with great restaurants, which is why we haven't starved to death. My kids and I are happy. My oldest is at Penn State. On weekends, the younger ones and I visit museums, play tennis, swim at the Y, or ride our bikes on the East River Drive. I haven't hit the lottery. My wife, however, did hit the lottery and won almost $100,000. With it came a 25-year-old handsome gym rat, who kept a smile on her face for almost a month before he vanished with all of her lottery winnings as well as the rest of the money she'd saved. I'm no expert on karma or cosmic justice. As an accountant, however, I've noticed over the years that my father's advice to me when I graduated college was 100% accurate. He cautioned me to remain honest, because in the long run, honest people do much better than liars and thieves about 90% of the time. Dear listener, if you have reached this far, please click on the subscribe button. It will be a great help.